All right, next question. Bentley2 asks, Glenn, I was wrong about Trump and what he would do. I disbelieve the mainstream news media depiction that Trump was a severe threat to democracy. Can you admit that you misjudged Trump? All of that is way too sweeping, I think, with respect to be able to just say yes or no to. I understand the sentiment. I guess I would acknowledge that some of the methods and tactics that the Trump administration has resorted to almost immediately has surprised me, just in terms of how extreme they are. Like deporting green card holders who are married to American citizens, or PhD students because they wrote an op-ed against Israel. Creating this framework that anybody should be afraid of criticizing Israel because the US government is showing that they will punish you. And it's not just foreign citizens either, by the way. It's also Americans as well. The Trump administration, when they submitted their demands to Colombia, demanded that Colombia, as a condition to even talking about receiving the funding that was frozen, they required them to suspend, severely suspend, or expel everybody who participated anyway in the protests against the Israeli war in Gaza. And as a result, Americans, American-born Americans, have been expelled because the government demanded it. The government has also demanded the introduction and implementation of a radically expanded definition of anti-Semitism that makes you in violation of campus rules if you criticize Israel in a way that this radical definition that has been adopted in the EU, that was promulgated by Israel, renders prohibited. So it's not just foreign students who are being deported, it's also American institutions, American academia, American students who are being punished by this attempt to really outlaw and criminalize and intimidate people out of criticizing Israel. So that is one thing that I did not expect them to do, but at the same time, you can look at other things that they're doing that are shocking to me. Like invoking the Alien Enemies Act to try and proclaim that the US is at war with a small, violent group of thugs and gang members from Venezuela. We're at war, like we were in World War I or World War II, or the War of 1812, so that you can now invoke wartime powers enacted in the late 18th century that has barely been enacted throughout American history. And then even when it was, the people who they wanted to deport got hearings to be able to demonstrate that they weren't actually Nazi sympathizers, weren't actually threats to the national security. And the Trump administration is not just deporting people with no hearing of any kind. They're not deporting them at all. Deporting means sending them back to their home. They're deporting them, quote unquote, by throwing them into a uniquely repressive, abusive prison in El Salvador, paying for them to be in prison, being kept there indefinitely to the point where El Salvador is saying they may stay here for life, all without a shred of due process for them to stay. Wait a minute, I'm not the person you think I am. It's a case of mistaken identity, or you misread my tattoos. Some process to make sure that we're not imprisoning for life people who are totally innocent. And so I do think, I will acknowledge that the speed of this stuff and the aggression with which it's carried out did surprise me. I probably would have said I don't think the Trump administration would do that at all, or certainly not as quickly as they've done. At the same time, they have, Trump said repeatedly on the campaign trail that he would do this. You can watch speeches where he says, I'm going to invoke the Alien Enemies Act and mass deport people, and we're going to go after foreign students and revoke their visas who participated in protests against Israel. So I think these things are anti-democratic. I think they're a violation of the Bill of Rights. I expect, or at least hope, and I would say expect, at least in some cases, that our federal courts, including the Supreme Court, will rule that some of these things are a violation of the Constitution. What I have a problem with is this binary assessment that Trump is a severe threat to democracy, because you can look at the Biden administration, and I do think many things that they did, including their systemic campaign to have the CIA and Homeland Security and the NIH bully and pressure and coerce big tech to ban dissent from their pronouncements on things like COVID and Ukraine was as unconstitutional and as severe of a threat to our Bill of Rights as anything the Trump administration is doing. I don't think you can say one is worse than the next. So I'm still, again, we're 2 months into the administration, 2 months, just a little over. And I don't think I've been coy about the serious alarm that I have about many of the things the Trump administration has been doing. Reinitiating the war in Gaza, restarting and then escalating the bombing campaign in Yemen, using rules of engagement that assign almost zero value to civilian life in Yemen. To say nothing of these deportations, these attacks on American institutions. I think the attempt to force law firms to restructure their pro bono program to promise hundreds of millions of dollars of free work in defense of the Trump administration, demanding that they do pro bono work on anti-Semitism specifically, like a DEI program. Just today, earlier today, Skadden Arps, one of the biggest, most powerful firms on the planet, that wasn't even targeted yet with an executive order by Trump, but preemptively reached an agreement with the White House that was chilling and creepy, where they're promising not to do certain kind of pro bono work, promising to do other types in a way that aligns with Trump's political agenda, forcing major law firms to submit to and promise to work for free for Trump's political vision. I do think a lot of these things are creepy and threatening and anti-democratic. But I also did shows before the election, several, on how many people on the right, many in the Trump circle who proclaim to believe in free speech actually have a gigantic Israel exception. I did an entire show on what the likely influence of Miriam Adelson's $100 million to the Trump campaign would be. I highlighted how Trump officials and people around him were vowing to deport students for the crime of criticizing Israel, protesting Israel. So it's not like my vision of Trump pre-election was this kind of anti-war pacifist, fully devoted defender of free speech and civil liberties. There's obvious dangers to Trump. I just think that the rhetoric of depicting Biden or George W. Bush or Obama as these kind of beacons of nobility and devotees of American democracy, in contrast to Trump, who's just this anti-democratic monster unlike thing we've ever seen before, I think that is what has been wildly overblown, and I still think that. Despite the fact that I'm certainly willing to admit that, presidents stand up all the time, or candidates stand up all the time and vow to do things on the campaign trail and then don't do them. As I said, I'm willing to admit that it has surprised me. Not just the velocity, but the intensity, the extremism, the aggression with which they're carrying out what I regard as obvious assaults on the Bill of Rights. And the way in which Trump supporters are willing to basically say or do anything to justify anything that the administration does. I mean, it took them 8 weeks. It took MAGA 8 weeks to go from what they had been saying for years. No more Mideast wars. F the military-industrial complex. No more endless war. Keep that money here at home for our own citizens. And then Trump restarts Biden's bombing campaign of Yemen, even though in 2024, Trump said he opposed Biden's bombing of Yemen. And that was when the Houthis were actually attacking U.S. ships. They're not attacking U.S. ships now, but Trump greenlit the massive escalation and bombing of them, killing lots of civilians. And suddenly MAGA's like, yeah, take them down. Like, to do such an about face of the things that you say you believed in, have some integrity. Like, have some duty as a citizen. Even if you support your leader still, even if you love him, even if you want him to be straight, stand up and say when you think he's doing something against what you said your values are. Same with the censorship thing. I can't tell you how many times a day I hear Trump supporters saying only American citizens have rights under the Constitution, no matter how much you show them that the Supreme Court has said for 150 years or more that everybody under U.S. government control, including even illegal aliens, but certainly people illegally in the United States, have the protections of the Bill of Rights. They'll never stop saying it because they need to say it to defend what Trump is doing. Going from, we love free speech is the most important thing, to, yeah, get these Israel critics out of our country, punish the colleges and universities that allow too much Israel criticism, punish American citizens who are students if they protest against Israel. And then you just turn on a dime and are like, yeah, censorship, that kind of censorship, that's really good. But it goes back to what I was saying before about the primacy of Israel, but also the willingness, not of all Trump supporters or not of all MAGA supporters, and not even all Democrats, to justify everything their party and their president is doing. But this is typically how our politics works. My first experience with that was, I started blogging in 2005, and my focus almost exclusively was on denouncing Bush and Cheney, the neocons, and their civil liberties assault under the war on terror. And I built up this huge audience, primarily some libertarians, good number of libertarians, but primarily Democrats and liberals who just were so happy somebody was vocally denouncing Bush and Cheney on these issues. And then 2009 comes and Obama gets inaugurated, and he continues a lot of these same programs he vowed to uproot that I had been criticizing, and even strengthens and extends some of them beyond where even Bush and Cheney took them. And I've obviously continued to criticize Obama on the same grounds that I had been criticizing Bush and Cheney for the same policies. And a huge number of them were like, wait a minute, we didn't really believe in that. We were just happy you were attacking Bush. Why are you attacking Obama? That was my first real experience with how people's partisan brains are willing to get them to abandon even their own passionately held beliefs. And I'm not saying anyone is above that I'm above it. It's a human instinct. We're very tribal by nature. We develop tribalistically. We think tribalistically. But part of the challenge of being a human being with some degree of critical thought and intellectual independence and integrity is doing your best to avoid succumbing to tribalism and reason for yourself and think for yourself about what your government is doing. As you may know, I have a lot of dogs at home. I'm talking more than 24. We also have a shelter for dogs that have another 150 or so. And so I'm all too familiar, in fact, with the various ailments that might afflict dogs. And one of them is chronic skin problems. If your dog is constantly itching and scratching or dealing with hot spots, you really have to check out Coat Defense. It's an all-natural solution that's been helping so many dogs. And here's why this caught my attention. I've seen firsthand from the shelter work we do and from our own dogs how often dogs develop things like yeast infections, especially in their paws, ears, and skin folds. It's really more common than a lot of people realize, but the usual treatments like steroids or antibiotics or Cytopoint or Apoquel, they might cover up the symptoms for a while, but they don't fix the root cause. And in some cases, they may actually make things worse over time. Coat Defense is different. Their daily preventative powder works as a dry shampoo, odor eliminator, and anti-itch powder. But what makes it special is that it eliminates yeast naturally by changing the terrain on your dog's skin so that yeast and bacteria cannot survive. They have no toxic chemicals, no synthetic junk, just safe, natural ingredients. They also make an aloe-based sensitive skin shampoo that calms irritated skin, preserves the natural oils and microbiome, and is totally free of parabens, sulfates, and anything artificial. And honestly, I've been really surprised reading the testimonials and seeing their products firsthand in my own dogs. Obviously, I would not recommend especially dog products without being highly confident in their safety and efficacy. I've heard from so many people that this is really the only thing that has worked after years of frustration with dogs finally itch-free and healthy again, and that's why I'm happy to partner with Coat Defense. So if your dog has been struggling and nothing else has helped, go to coatdefense.com and use promo code Glenn for 15% off your first order. That's coatdefense.com, code Glenn. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.